These are the three men who, between 1989 and 1995, decided which country singers became superstars and which ones quietly disappeared. Their names are Jimmy Bowen, Tony Brown, and Tim DuBois. They sat in 3 offices, on 3 different Nashville labels, less than a mile apart. And between them, they signed almost every name you remember from the boom, including Garth Brooks, Clint Black, Travis Tritt, George Strait, Reba McEntire, Alan Jackson, Brooks and Dunn, Vince Gill, Wynonna, Trisha Yearwood, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Patty Loveless, Diamond Rio, and Brad Paisley. You did not get a hit record in 1990s country without one of these 3 saying yes. The Hat Acts, the Neo-Traditionalists, the Crossover Stars, all of them ran through one of 3 desks. The strangest part of the story is not who they signed. It is how briefly the window stayed open. By the year 2000, all 3 were gone. The empire they built outlived them, but only just. This is the story of the 3 kingmakers. To understand how 3 men ended up running country music, you have to understand what country music looked like just before they did. In 1988, Nashville was the smallest of the 3 major American music capitals, and it was struggling. The 80s urban cowboy boom had collapsed, the one that had briefly pushed country into mainstream pop culture and then burned itself out. Hat acts had not fully hit yet. Country radio was in a defensive crouch, with fewer stations, smaller audiences, and leaner budgets. The major labels had Nashville offices, but most of them were treated as side businesses by their parent companies in New York and Los Angeles. That was about to change. 3 things were happening at the same time, and nobody on Music Row had quite connected the dots yet. Jimmy Bowen had just walked into Capital Nashville. He was 51 years old, a Texan, and not a countryman by background. He had spent the 60s in Los Angeles producing Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. He had won a Record of the Year Grammy for Strangers in the Night. He came to Nashville in 1977 and ran one label after another: MGM, MCA Twice, Elektra, and Warner. Each time he took over a label, he fired most of the staff and rebuilt from scratch. By the time he hit Capitol in 1988, his nickname inside the industry was the chairman of the board, and people were terrified of him. Tony Brown was at MCA Nashville, working as Bowen's lieutenant. Brown was a piano player from North Carolina who had spent the last 2 years of Elvis Presley's life as the keyboard player in his TCB band. He was a musician, not a businessman, and that turned out to matter. And Tim DuBois was a songwriter, a Cherokee citizen from Grove, Oklahoma, with 2 degrees in accounting and a CPA license. He had no record label experience. He was teaching accounting at Vanderbilt's Owen School of Management to pay the bills while he wrote songs on the side. In 1989, his phone was about to ring. Within 12 months, all 3 of them had power. Start with Bowen at Capital Nashville. In 1989, a 27-year-old Oklahoma kid named Garth Brooks had a debut single creeping up the charts. Bowen went out to see him perform live, and according to Bowen's own account years later, he came back from that show and told his staff to earmark 75% of the entire label budget for one artist. He said that something was happening on stage that only happens once every 20 years, the way it had with Elvis or the Beatles, and Capital Nashville was going to BT the whole company on it. He was right. Garth's second album, No Fences, came out in 1990 and sold around 18 million copies in the United States alone. Rope in the Wind followed in 1991, sold over 14 million copies, and entered the Billboard 200 at number 1, the first country album in history to do that. While Garth was breaking records, Bowen was rebuilding the entire label underneath him. He brought in digital recording. He doubled production budgets. He modernized the way drums were tracked, the way budgets were structured, the way albums were marketed. He renamed the label, controversially, from Capital Nashville to Liberty Records, a move backed by Capitol's London-based parent company, EMI, and moved its offices off Music Row entirely. Inside the industry, people said Bowen had industrialized country music. Meanwhile, 2 miles away, Tony Brown had been promoted. When Bowen left MCA Nashville in 1988 to take Capitol, Brown stepped up as executive vice president of A&R, then took over as president of MCA Nashville in 1993. From 1990 to 1993, Brown was Billboard's #1 country producer. He produced Reba McEntire's Rumor Has It. He produced Wynonna's solo debut, which went double platinum. He produced Vince Gill's I Still Believe in You. But the artist who really made Brown's reputation was George Strait. In 1992, Brown co-produced Strait's Pure Country soundtrack. It sold over 6 million copies. He would go on to co-produce 20 albums with Strait, generating 22 #1 singles and over 45 million in sales between them. Strait's neo-traditionalist sound, rooted in classic honky-tonk, resistant to pop crossover, was exactly the kind of work Brown understood instinctively. What made Brown different from Bowen was his ear for the margins. While he was producing chart-topping singles for Strait and Reba, he was also signing artists nobody else in Nashville would touch. Lyle Lovett, Steve Earle, Nancy Griffith, The Mavericks, Kelly Willis, Joe Ely, Todd Snyder, Allison Moorer. He produced Steve Earle's Guitar Town and championed The Mavericks before anyone in radio knew what to do with them. Years later, Billboard would name MCA Nashville the label of the decade for the 1990s, and the reason was Brown's dual life. He kept the lights on with the mainstream and used that money to fund the underground. The third office was the newest one. In 1989, Clive Davis, the legendary head of Arista Records in New York, decided he wanted a country division. And to run it, he picked the unlikeliest executive in Nashville, Tim DuBois, the accountant-turned-songwriter who had never run a label in his life. DuBois opened Arista Nashville with a tiny staff and a single signing on June 26, 1989. The artist was an unknown Georgia kid with a deep voice and a thrift store wardrobe named Alan Jackson. Jackson was the quiet anchor of what people on Music Row were starting to call the class of 1989, a wave of hat acts hitting the format at the same moment. Garth Brooks was on Capitol. Clint Black had just broken on RCA Records Nashville. Travis Tritt was about to sign to Warner, and Alan Jackson was on Arista. 4 artists, 4 labels, 1 window. Jackson's debut, Here in the Real World, came out the following year. The follow-up, Don't Rock the Jukebox, went multi-platinum. Then DuBois did something even smarter. He took a singer named Kix Brooks and a singer named Ronnie Dunn, 2 men chasing solo deals, and told them they should be a duo. Brooks and Dunn went on to record more #1 singles and sell more records than any country duo in history. Inside 4 years, DuBois had moved 75 million units. By 1996, Business Nashville had named him the single most powerful person in the music industry. Entertainment Weekly put him on its 101 most powerful list 2 years running. Pollstar named him Record Executive of the Year in 1992. The CPA from Oklahoma, who started out teaching accounting at Vanderbilt while writing his first hit songs, was now selling more records than anyone in country music history. 3 offices, 3 philosophies, same 5-year window. And then it started to come apart. The first crack appeared at Capitol Nashville. By 1992, Garth Brooks was the biggest selling artist on planet Earth, and he wanted to be paid like it. Specifically, he wanted the kind of royalty rate Michael Jackson had, somewhere north of 25%. The standard country deal was a fraction of that. Garth went to Bowen. Bowen, by his own account in his 1997 autobiography, told Garth he was not Michael Jackson. That answer did not go over well. Brooks blamed Bowen for what he saw as soft promotion of his next 2 albums, The Chase and In Pieces. He hated the rebrand from Capitol Nashville to Liberty Records. He hated that the offices had moved off Music Row. The relationship deteriorated through 1993 and into 1994. Then, in 1994, Garth Brooks did something a country artist had never done before. He went over Bowen's head to the executives at EM1, Capitol's London-based parent company, and told them in essence that he would not deliver another album for the label as long as Jimmy Bowen was running it. For the most powerful artist in country music to threaten the most powerful executive in country music, in writing, to a corporate parent, that was new. It was the kind of confrontation that could have flattened either man's career. The pay-per-view showdown never happened. In late 1994, Bowen was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. He retired in early 1995 and moved to Hawaii. Liberty was quietly renamed Capitol Nashville. The Bowen era was over. The second crack was quieter. Tony Brown's hybrid model, mainstream hits paying for Americana underdogs, depended on country radio being willing to play occasionally weird material. By the mid-1990s, country radio was consolidating. Big chains were buying up small stations, and programmers stopped taking risks. Records by Lyle Lovett and the Mavericks were not getting added. The format started narrowing around hat acts, and Brown's left-of-center signings started costing more than they returned. He kept signing them anyway, because that was his ear, but the math at the label level slowly stopped working in his favor. The third crack was structural. Tim DuBois had built Arista Nashville into a juggernaut. Over 100 million records had been sold by 2000. But by then, BMG, Arista's parent company, was restructuring. Clive Davis, his original protector, was forced out of the parent company in 2000. The corporate logic that had let DuBois run Arista Nashville like a country fiefdom no longer applied. He was pushed out the same year. Inside a span of barely 5 years, the three kingmakers went from running country music to standing outside the building. The strangest part of all of this is the timing. The men who had decided who became a country star in the 1990s were all gone before the decade was even fully analyzed. The class of 1989 had only just settled into adulthood. Garth Brooks was about to launch his disastrous Chris Gaines project. Alan Jackson was still releasing #1 singles. Brooks and Dunn were the biggest duo in any genre. The kingdom was still standing, but the kingmakers had left the throne room. Here is the kicker. In 2002, two of the three kingmakers founded a label together. Tony Brown left MCA that year and partnered with Tim DuBois to launch Universal South Records. Two of the three men who had shaped country music's biggest decade, who had run rival labels, who had competed for the same artists for 10 straight years, were now business partners. They signed Joe Nichols, Shooter Jennings, cross-Canadian ragweed, Allison Moorer. The label ran for several years before it was wound down. Bowen never came back. He retired permanently, first to Maui, then Arizona, where he is in his late 80s today. He has not produced a record in 30 years. Brown was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2025. By then, his career numbers were beyond comparison. More than 100 #1 singles, more than 100 million records sold, 4 Grammy wins, and the ACM Icon Award. DuBois went on to lead Universal South with Brown, then built an artist management firm. He has stayed close to the industry. He still teaches at Vanderbilt's Owen School of Management, the same school where he once taught accounting while writing his first hit songs. Now think about what these three men actually did, and how strange it looks from a distance. The class of 1989 manufactured the artists. The studio musicians played on every record. The songwriters supplied the material. But the structural decisions, who got signed, who got promoted, whose record got the budget, whose video got pulled, those decisions ran through 3 offices, 3 desks, 3 taste profiles. Bowen brought the LA mogul instinct. Brown brought the musician's ear. DuBois brought the accountant's spreadsheet. Together, they covered every angle of how to find, develop, and sell a country artist in the 1990s. That's why 1990s country sounds the way it does. It is not the sound of a genre. It's the sound of 3 men's taste, executed at scale, in the same 5-year window, before the industry consolidated, the radio format narrowed, and the corporate parents lost interest in letting anyone run a Nashville label like a personal kingdom. The reason the era feels so sharp in retrospect, the reason 1990s country is its own genre in your memory, and not just country music from the 1990s, is that it had editors. 3 of them. each one with veto power, each one looking for something different. When the editors left, the era ended. The records they made are still on the radio. Garth Brooks is still touring. Alan Jackson, Brooks and Dunn, George Strait, Reba McEntire, Vince Gill, Trisha Yearwood, all still recording, still selling, still drawing crowds. The artists outlasted the kingmakers by a wide margin, which is how it should be. But every time you hear Friends in Low Places, or Chattahoochee, or Boot Scootin' Boogie, or I Cross My Heart, or any of the dozens of records that defined the era, somewhere upstream of the song there is a meeting in 1989 or 1990 or 1991 in one of 3 offices on Music Row. And in that meeting, one of 3 men, Bowen, Brown, or DuBois, said the word yes. That's the hidden mechanism behind the most commercially dominant decade in country music history. It wasn't the artists, it wasn't the studios, it was who got to say yes. 3 men, 3 offices, 1 window, and it closed.